Recently, the governor's trying to remind voters in Illinois about that by appearing on stage with Vice President Mike Pence. But later he dodged questions from a reporter about whether that means he fully embraces the entire Trump administration.
Mike Pence has been a longtime good friend of mine. I have supported him for years. He's supported me for years. And it was an honor for me to introduce him at an event.
Can you support him without supporting the president he works for?
Mike Pence is a good friend. I think he's done a very good job as vice president. He was a very good governor of Indiana, and he was a six-term congressman.
Do you support President Trump then, if you support him?
Well, we can talk about issues of where the administration has done great things like tax cuts, regulatory relief, working hard for fair trade. I'm very supportive of many things. And where I've disagreed with the president, for example, comments on Charlottesville, or separating families at the border. I have spoken out very forcefully where I disagree with the president.
Well, there is no tightrope. It's the Trump-Pence ticket. It's the president, the vice president, and they clearly stand together.
And joining us now on our Reporters Roundtable is Greg Bishop with the Illinois News Network. Greg, good to have you back. And Jim Leach from WMAY. I think your first time here on Capital Connection. Good to have both of you. Those comments there from Governor Rauner, interesting, and we hear JB Pritzker trying to tie him to the presidency, just as the governor's trying to sort of decouple himself a little bit and talk about specific issues. How do you see this sort of governor's dilemma here?
You know, I think it is a tightrope that the governor's walking, and frankly, I think he's walking it pretty well. He's finessing this pretty well. Embracing Mike Pence doesn't really do him a lot of damage. Vice presidents, I don't think, move the meter a whole lot one way or the other. He's being very measured in how he approaches the president. When things create this sort of firestorm, as they have with the Russia situation, for example, he can speak out about that and not be terribly at risk politically with it. But he's managed to distance himself from a lot of the other controversies. So he's not alienating the base. He's not losing any support that I think he otherwise would have had. I think it's a difficult situation for him, but so far I think he's handling it.
In most cases, when he criticizes the president, he's got a cohort of Republicans who have already done so, or a big unison, a big chorus who have done that. And there is some reluctance for individuals, politicians, to get into a one-off clash with the president. That didn't end well for the Republicans in the primary who went against the president, and it hasn't ended well for others since. But on the issues, though, this governor has sometimes run counter with the president's administration or their set of policy agenda items. Greg, some of those issues, for instance, on abortion recently, or, I mean, these are issues that the governor has really stepped into head on.
I think the HB 40 issue is definitely one of those that made major waves within the Republican Party. If you look at the timeline of that, the comments that he made to Republicans, the comments that he made to Catholic leaders, for instance, but then coming out and actually signing the bill, that did seem to run afoul with the Republican base quite a bit, to where we saw the primary challenge from Jeannie Ives.
And you have to wonder what Mike Pence would think about that particular bill.
Right, Mike Pence being very, very pro-life. And other issues that the governor addressed this week include gun legislation that some in the conservative base may say it doesn't fall into step with the Second Amendment rights, for instance. One of those being the 72-hour waiting period for all firearms. The other one being the gun confiscation for certain red flags. But the governor did come out again today, or this week rather, and explicitly said that he's going to veto the Gun Dealer Licensing or Gun Dealer Certification Act, saying that it's going to be bad for small business.
Right, and he also said in his press conference when he signed, or shortly after signing that gun bill, that it wasn't the bill he originally wanted because it didn't protect the Second Amendment enough, but that he wanted to go back and try to tweak it a little bit later with a trailer bill. So there we have again this governor trying to walk this tightrope. And should he get credit for that, or is this because this is a generally moderate state, Jim. I mean,
it's a calculated gamble. He's betting that when push comes to shove in November, conservatives are going to look at the option between himself and JB Pritzker, and they're going to hold their nose and vote for him anyway. This is his effort to try to bring independents into the fold, to get some of that more moderate vote back into his camp, and he's rolling the dice with it. And probably it pays off. I mean, there is the Sam McCann option out there. I think to the extent that people even know about McCann, because he doesn't have a lot of money, there's some suspicion because of his ties to unions and things like that. I bet conservatives come back into the fold come November.
For too long, we've had situations where guns can be kept in the hands of individuals who are mentally unstable or deemed to be dangerous. We cannot have that situation continue to exist. An emergency restraining order bill, which allows judges, as approached by law enforcement or family members, judges to issue restraining orders to remove guns or prevent gun purchases from those individuals who are deemed to be dangerous to themselves or to others.
Well, the governor once again has shirked his responsibility. We have got to stand up and get a gun dealer licensing law on the books in the state of Illinois. Here was his big opportunity. It's clear that he's not listening. He's not watching that we've got gun violence occurring all across the state.
And we're back again with our Reporters Roundtable. Greg and Jim, good to be back with you. We saw there the debate. Governor Rauner says, I compromised here to pass something for public safety. JB Pritzker, his Democratic opponent, says he doesn't go far enough, and he wants to see the Gun Dealer Licensing Act pass as well. Governor Rauner just won't sign that, even the newest iteration of it. Greg, what is in this new red flag law? What are the specifics of it? How does it work?
The measure would allow for a loved one to find certain behaviors alarming to the point where they can go to law enforcement and to a judge and say, my loved one is experiencing certain behaviors that are either a threat to themselves or to others. They own firearms. I'd like those firearms to be confiscated for their well-being.
And then the process, the judge goes to the law enforcement. They then revoke the FOID card and physically come to the house or the property and seize the guns.
From my understanding, yes, and there's a due process involved where there's a set amount of time at first, but it could be up to 6 months and then an additional 6 months more for an entire year's worth of those firearms being out of the possession of that individual who has been red flagged.
We've seen, I think, 23, 26, 20-some counties, 25% of the counties in this state, roughly, have come out and declared themselves as gun sanctuaries. The first to do that in Effingham had the NRA in town on Thursday night, and they are there to say we aren't going along with this new push in the wake of Parkland and other places to just sacrifice gun rights in their words, and they want to draw this battle line and say we want to protect gun rights. So here again, Jim, we have a Republican governor in a blue to moderate state that's sort of inching closer into that lane. What are the risks and pitfalls for him in this?
Well, you know, it's such a volatile issue, but for example, on the red flag bill, we've seen situations right here in Illinois of people who had guns when they clearly shouldn't have, with tragic consequences to it. The case out of Morton where a father reportedly gave the guns back to his son, and then the son wound up allegedly shooting up the Waffle House down in Tennessee. So there's a lot, I think, of bipartisan recognition that a bill like that has a lot of merit. The gun sanctuary issue is going to be challenging, and it's really interesting. It's obviously a response to the whole sanctuary state notion that the state doesn't have to do the federal government's job.
There's a small bit of trolling in the word sanctuary.
Sure.
Right.
But really what's interesting is, you know, the counties are saying this, we don't want even state laws affecting gun rights. But the county is the state in terms of enforcement of laws. So it sets up the potential. These are mostly symbolic, but it does set up the potential for a real clash of what their legal obligations are in enforcing and upholding these laws.
And I'll say, when I talked with the Illinois Council Against Handgun Violence on this issue, they said that they see this as a political issue. This group, of course, a coalition of various groups out of the Chicago area where there's a lot of gun violence. They are pushing for the Gun Licensing Act, for instance, for gun dealers.
Which would create a separate state agency in addition to the federal one that would monitor and regulate individual gun shops.
Right. So when it comes to the sanctuary counties for gun laws, the Illinois State Rifle Association said that, you know, this is a response to gun owners who feel that they are being improperly targeted for things that they have not done. So when you have mentally ill people allegedly going in and causing havoc with gun violence in various places, the gun rights supporters feel that that is a way of they didn't do that. They shouldn't be punished for other people's actions, and that's how they view a lot of these gun laws coming down. Hence the reason why some of these counties, and what they tell me, is a grassroots effort.
Yeah.
There doesn't seem to be.
It's a lot of messaging.
Yeah, and it's a lot of messaging, and it's a way to say, you know what, we're drawing a line in the sand, so to speak.
With this bill, though, recruiting the family members to be watchdogs in this area is interesting because federal crime statistics do tell us that a lot of the gun violence that occurs is not between random strangers, but between family members, people that know one another. And so those relationships are now more closely intertwined with the government, and that'll be interesting to see. It's kind of new territory. We haven't been down that road before. It'll be interesting to see what examples emerge. Jim, you mentioned the county's legal obligation to participate with state law. That's an interesting comparison to what's happening at the federal and state level with this issue of immigration. Another bill the governor signed, the Trust Act, which gives some level of protection to immigrants. It says if a police officer pulls someone over driving down the road and finds that they don't have legal documentation, they cannot arrest that person unless there's been evidence of a crime committed, not a moving violation or something. But now Attorney General Lisa Madigan's office is suing President Trump and Attorney General Jeff Sessions' administration, saying, we think you're targeting police officers and departments and courts in Illinois, retaliating against us for this Trust Act by not giving us grant money. Greg, there's an argument from both sides that these police officers have a legal obligation to uphold the law, but which laws is the question, right?
The Trust Act did kind of pop up out of nowhere, covering the State House here. It was in an executive committee, came out, went to the Senate floor, passed, and then it just went through the process. The governor ending up signing it, again, one of those issues that kind of rattled other Republicans.
After law enforcement got on board, he signed it.
After the law enforcement got on board with some tweaking of the language. Now, Attorney General Madigan's lawsuit against the Trump administration is over the Byrne Justice Grant Awards. The state of Illinois has typically gotten several $1 million in past years, spread to different municipalities, Chicago being one of them, Champaign being another, and various others. And the grant dollars are used to help train and protect law enforcement. So Attorney General Madigan is saying that with those dollars being withheld by the Trump administration, as she says, is punishment for the Trust Act being in place, she says that makes law enforcement less safe. Talking with opponents of the Trust Act, those like State Representative Alan Skillicorn, he said that having the Trust Act in place is what actually makes Illinois less safe because he says that it helps foster more illegal immigration without holding people accountable. Because as you rightly pointed out, the Trust Act essentially would say that local and state law enforcement can't act on immigration enforcement detention orders unless there's another separate criminal violation with a warrant involved.
But Jim, can the federal government or an agency within the federal government compel police officers who have a patrol beat on Main and 5th Street to also go round up people and do the job of ICE or of the Department of Homeland Security?
And punish them if they don't. And I think it's a legitimate legal question. It's at least to my experience, unusual to see an attorney general so aggressively going after the federal government. And Lisa Madigan's done this on a number of different issues. But I think there are valid legal questions as to whether the federal government can essentially punish states for saying, this is not our responsibility, immigration is your responsibility, and you have to go through a process if you want us to be involved in it. And so that's going to be the fight that plays out in court, obviously.
It's interesting. Attorney General candidate Erica Harold, the Republican from Champaign, says that many of these legal fights are political posturing and that it's just that the Attorney General's office should be more focused on corruption within the state and less focused on picking fights with the political opponent in the White House.
But if it starts coming down to actual dollars and cents and the state's losing grant money and it's losing its ability to do the things that it needs to do or depends on the federal government to do because of these battles, it seems like that is an arena that the Attorney General could be involved in. Now, there's no doubt the AG has plenty to keep themselves busy just in dealing with state issues. And this is, at least as I said, it seems a new phenomenon in being so aggressive in pushing back against whether it's on immigration or the Department of Education or on the family detentions and separations, et cetera. But I think you could make the argument that it is within the Attorney General's scope of responsibility to address things that have a direct impact on the state's conduct of its priorities and laws.
And we should say Governor Rauner appeared on a campaign stage with Vice President Pence. He says regularly he's in close contact with this administration, and he talks to them about issues that affect the state. We don't know if he's brought this up to ask for the federal government to unlock those funds. Jim and Greg, great to have you with us. Thanks for having us. We'll be back in just a moment.